Good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome to the SIPFA webinar on the Procurement Act 2023, Progress, Pitfalls, and Practical Insights. My name is Mohammed Hans. I'm the Procurement Advisor for the SIPFA Procurement Commission Network. Today's event is actually brought to you in association with One Advance. And in terms of speaking, we've got Ian Owen, who's a SIPFA qualified accountant, sits on the SIPFA Council, and also representing One Advance today. I'll introduce Ian in a few moments. I'm just going to give a backdrop to this session today on procurement pitfalls under the Procurement Act. So the Procurement Act, as many of you will be aware, was implemented on the 24th of February 2025. So we've had 8 months of the Procurement Act since it went live. It actually received royal assent back in 2023, so 26th of October 2023, but it actually just went live on the 24th of February this year. So today's session is going to be about discussing what's happened so far, any key impacts. Has it actually really gone live? That's a bit of a rhetorical question that I'm asking. Or is it going to be a case of wait and see? And I shall show you a few kind of data in a few moments, which will probably give us some idea in terms of how much implementation we've seen so far since the Act went live. Now, the Act is the biggest change to procurement rules in a generation. In fact, it's also heralded to be the biggest change of procurement rules in the history of procurement rules in the UK. So big words and big ambitions in terms of trying to have more transparency in procurement. It's a new era of procurement under the Procurement Act, unlocking opportunities for UK businesses. The collective public procurement purse is about £407 billion, equates to 12% of GDP. So we're talking huge sums of money here. Local government spends approximately 70 to 80 billion pounds a year. So it's a big size of pot of money that we're spending. And what the government is trying to achieve here by these new rules is to drive growth opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprise, and also at the same time try to exclude those suppliers who have actually been a bit naughty in their behavior, in their actions. Here I've got 2 images. 21st of February, some of you who are in the procurement world will be quite familiar. You were all jumping up and down, all those contract notices which were published under the old regime, the public contract regulations. We thought this is going to give us at least several months where we don't really need to do much worry. On the 24th of February, and maybe some of you, maybe even today, will probably be scratching your head and say, this Procurement Act, there's a lot to do. It's an overwhelming piece of legislation. That's why I was saying, has it actually fully gone live? My own personal view is that it has gone live to an extent, but we'll actually, in the next 6 to 12 months, we'll actually see the full Act going live. Some of the notices have only just started to appear. There's a couple of notices which haven't actually gone live yet, and those are going to be the interesting notices under the Procurement Act as well. So what we want to share with you, discuss with you, explore with you today is, has it resulted in greater innovation in your contracts? That was one of the key themes, objectives of the Procurement Act, to try to introduce more innovation in public sector contracts. Have you started to maximize the use of the new competitive flexible procedure? As you know, the 8 procedures under the old regime has been replaced by just 2 procedures, the open procedure, which is more or less what we did before, and the new competitive flexible procedure, which is up to you to decide how you actually want to undertake the procurement. But have you actually started to make use of the competitive flexible procedure? Have you attempted to refine the award criteria? You can publish your tender notice and you can still make the changes now, which is different to the previous regime. How many direct award of contracts have you actually been making quietly? Well, you can't make these direct award of contracts quietly anymore. Everything has to be transparent. I'll show you some data in a moment to show you how many direct award of contracts have been made since the Act went live. How have you actually coped with the increased transparency obligation? And this is the key change under the Procurement Act, the increased number of notices that contracting authorities have to publish. 17 notices in total have to be published at different stages in the procurement and contract management life cycle. Are you also starting to get increased interest? Have you started to award more contract to small and medium-sized enterprises? Do you know what a small and medium-sized enterprise is? It's defined in the Procurement Act as any organization which has up to 250 members of staff, £36 million turnover. Have you developed in-house contract management guides and training? Procurement Act is not just for procurement, it's procurement and contract management. So contract management is a key part of the Procurement Act. In fact, it should have been called the Procurement and Contract Management Act to make it a lot simpler for people to follow and understand. And finally, have you actually updated your internal governance documents, your templates that you're using, your contract terms and conditions? So overall, Procurement Act heralds something quite new, something quite interesting, something very challenging for authorities, but at the same time, it is an overwhelming change and it is going to take some time to fully embed and implement within our authorities and our organizations. So this is the kind of procurement and contract cycle where I've actually mapped out the different notices, the 17 different notices that authorities have actually need to publish at various stages throughout the procurement and contract management lifecycle. And as you can see, it's a very, very busy kind of slide I can show you here. In fact, whenever I show this particular slide to colleagues, they say, Mohammed, you're not showing us a procurement and contract cycle, you're showing us a vicious circle. And in many ways, it is a bit of a vicious circle because there are a number of notices that practitioners, colleagues, and authorities will have to publish. In fact, even if you want to have a cup of tea these days, you have to publish a notice. So you start off with the kind of preliminary market engagement notices, the tender notices, and the transparency notice if you want to make a direct award of the contract. And then at contract award stage, there's two contract notices that have to be published, a contract award notice before you actually award the contract and the contract details notice after you've actually entered into the contract. And then you've also got a number of notices that you have to publish during the contract management life cycle. The one very interesting one is the contract performance notice, which is, I'm told, going to go live on the 1st of November. But that's going to create some interesting kind of actions and activities in not just authorities, but in the supplier community as well. So this is the data which I was kind of highlighting earlier. Total number of notices which have been published, about 38,000 notices have been published since the 24th of February under the Procurement Act. And as you can see, some interesting kind of findings. Authorities have actually published quite a few pipeline notices and preliminary market engagement notice, which is a really welcome development. The earlier that you can engage with your supplier community, the better contracts that we'll hopefully get in the long term. Tender notices, we've had approximately just over 8,500, which is slightly less compared to the previous regime under the same kind of time scale. I had looked at the number of contract notices which were published the PCR regime between February and October, and we just had a few more contract notices which had been published. So it shows that there has been some slight decline in the activity levels in contracting authorities. Interesting, we've had a number of transparency notices which have been published. And then obviously we've got contact details notice, which you can see, which is the highest chart here, bar here. You have to publish a contact details notice for everything above £30,000, including VAT. In terms of dynamic markets, as you can see towards the right-hand side of this particular slide, there's not been a huge amount of activity, and it's not very surprising. There are some limitations in the use of dynamic markets, and therefore we haven't actually seen too many dynamic markets which have been set up so far. And here's a comparison between, in terms of the total overall notices which have been published by all contracting authorities and those which have been published by councils. As you can see, the councils do play a major, it's nearly 30 to 40% of all the notices which have been published are from local authorities. So local authorities, we've got a number of delegates from local authorities today, and local authority procurement activities is a major part of the entire procurement kind of operations that we have in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. On that note, I'm going to hand you over to our kind of guest speaker, somebody who's got lots of experience in the public sector, Ian Owen. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Yeah, do you want to just whip to the next slide, please? Oh, I was just going to say, for everybody on the call, this is being recorded, so you will be able to catch up on SITFA's YouTube channel. You see, I never thought I'd be saying SITFA and YouTube together, but there you go. And if you've got any questions, then please do put them into the Q&A box, because that's the only way we can actually deal with questions on this call. It would be really good, as Mohammed mentioned, it would be really good to get your feedback as we're going through this, because this is very much a brave new world. Okay, so just by way of introduction, thank you for that kind intro, Mohammed. I am indeed a SITFA accountant, as you can probably tell by my thinning hair, of a number of years. I do sit on SITFA Council. I've actually got a focus on SITFA Council for technology and artificial intelligence, which ties in quite well with the sort of day job that I have now and that I've had for a long time, which is very much focused on how we use new technology to actually drive transformation and improvements in the workplace. You can see the logo in front of you is called Powering Your World of Work. That is what it is all about for us at One Advanced. It's about how we make life simple for your users and for you in the way that you have to do your day-to-day job. So powering your world of work is really important. It's important for me. So as well as being a SITFA council member and having a role at One Advanced as the industry director for public sector, which means I get involved with NHS and local government and housing and government, etc. I have worked in local government, I've worked in central government, I've worked in the NHS, and I'm currently the chair of the audit committee for a further education college. So I've got a very, very vested interest in how we do things efficiently and how we can make procurement work and how we can make procurement work best for the citizens that we serve. Next slide, please, Mohammed. One of the things that I did want to just very briefly do is just introduce One Advanced, because we're one of the world's best kept secrets. So we are a UK focused, UK centric organisation supporting a vast swathe of the public sector in the UK. Not a lot of people always realise that that's what we do, but so I just wanted to put that into context. So we're impacting 40 million citizens a day through the services that we provide. If you've ever had to use NHS 111 or you've been to your local GP practice lately, the chances are, if it's 111, it will have been our software that powered that. If you've been to your GP practice, the notes that are getting fed in from the various trusts coming in from people with discharge notices, it uses our AI to actually translate that and do the SNOMED coding and things like that within the surgery to make things more efficient at a GP level. We also work with over 200 local councils, 11 million tenants with our housing management solutions, as well as a range of government departments. And we're really proud of this little thing on the left-hand side, where we actually got recognised as Europe's best employer in a Financial Times survey. So we're going to crow about that, aren't we? Next slide, please, Mohammed. That's the end of the sales pitch, by the way, folks. Yeah, ish. What I do want to do is to just talk a little bit about what it is that we do within the public sector. So this little diagram in the middle just talks about One Advanced Government and Housing. When we're talking about government, we're talking about the whole of government, so government, local government, etc. And in terms of the solutions that we provide, we'll come back to some of this in the future, but it's all about providing a single solution. We provide a single platform, single experience, single version of the truth, single back to slap. Apparently I have to say back to slap, not throat to choke these days. So single back to slap. It's that's what we're all about, providing a platform that services your requirements. So if you look around from the left-hand side of that little circle, we've got finance and spend management, which is the focus for today. We also do governance and risk management, people management, as you would expect. We do a lot in social care, so care and business management, and of course workforce management. So you know, that's various field and workforce management systems to support your employees. At One Advanced, we've been through a major transformation, particularly over the last couple of years. We've spent over £80 million transforming our organisation, and that's why you'll see some of the things that we've been doing in connection with the Procurement Act coming through, because that's where our focus is, what's important to us. Next slide, please, Mohammed. I just wanted to touch on some reflections since the introduction of the Act, because obviously we did some work prior to the Act coming on stream. I'm not sure my slides actually moved on, Mohammed. Yeah, there we go. So when we did some pre-introduction surveys, we found that, and this is going back, you know, perhaps 9 months or so, 66% of the people that we surveyed were either overwhelmed or unprepared. 38% had a plan, but were constrained particularly by limited resources. Who'd have thought that, eh? Who'd have thought that our procurement teams would be overworked and under-resourced? Absolutely. 6% thought they were close to having something, and 0% were ready. So the question is, and it's interesting, you know, Mohammed said this at the start, what's changed? And the evidence is at the moment that maybe not that much has changed so far, but there are some good reasons for that. And so I think we're still seeing from the people that we talk to at the moment that there are still some challenges adapting to some of the changes required by the Act, because obviously there is a lot of extra admin that's required. There is definitely increased awareness, but there are few organisations that are fully prepared for this. And again, some of that comes back to resource availability. So nobody is claiming to have this completely under control at the moment, unless somebody's going to type in the Q&A box and say, actually, Ian, we have got it completely under control. I think what most people are finding is that they're still learning. And as we put groups of procurement professionals together, that seems to be a fairly consistent feedback that we are taking. It is about limited resources. It is about some talent gaps. And of course, we've got the impacts of local government reorganisation impacting on 21 of the county areas within England at the moment. So that's causing a major challenge in terms of resources, but also in terms of people's focus. And, you know, what is keeping people up at night? Is it the Procurement Act? It certainly is for some, but for others, they're more concerned about what the state of the county is going to be in the future. And is it going to be 1 unitary, 2 unitaries, 3, 4, 5, 6? You know, there are a range of variations. So LGR is causing us a big problem. From my point of view, the challenge with LGR is that it's causing a little bit of non-movement. So people are actually frightened of actually taking any decisions or making any changes because they don't know what the structure of the organisation will be like in the future. Even if that future is, you know, a few years away, LGR is going to impact, and there are going to be new organisations, there are going to be shadow authorities, but we're still going to be running the existing structures for a considerable amount of time. And therefore, LGR can't be a reason for us to do nothing. And I often talk, and apologies if you've listened to me before and it's like, oh God, he's on about that again. I talk a lot about the status quo bias, and it's like, we don't like changing things. We don't like to make things different or hard for ourselves. But actually, we're in a situation at the moment where the cost of doing nothing is actually more than the cost of doing something. So we do actually have to do something, particularly with regard to PA23. The other thing is around compliance assurance. There's lots of new asks within the Act, and there is some uncertainty about how to actually meet those requirements. And then there is some challenges with regard to actually having the systems, the solutions, the resources to actually put those into effect. So what's next? The Act is undoubtedly increasing the compliance burden on procurement teams, and we're seeing people struggling. Increasing transparency is good, right? You know, that's what we all want to see, but that additional reporting is really difficult. And the complexity is creating some hesitation we're finding within procurement teams and within the overall buyer community. We're also having to keep an eye out for what's going on with the central platform and updates, because there is still functionality to come out on that. The Cabinet Office guidance, again, you know, I think as Mohammed said, 17 notices, we don't know what they all are in final details yet. So we've got to keep an eye on what's coming out of the Cabinet Office in terms of guidance on PA23. And then we've got to think about some of the sector-specific adoption. And again, Mohammed mentioned that 40% seems to be coming from councils at the moment. It is interesting. One of the things that we've noticed is a significant reduction coming out of the education business. So we've got a really sort of like large further education particular portfolio, and we've noticed that there is less coming out of there at the moment. And maybe we'll come back to that, because again, I think there's some reasons for that. Next slide, please, Mohammed. Thank you. So in terms of key developments, what we are seeing is customers right across the public sector. So we're quite lucky at One Advanced in that we serve a wide, you know, all of the public sector effectively, and across a lot of different product ranges as well. So what we are certainly seeing is we are seeing the notices coming through at the moment, but we are definitely seeing less. And I think, again, this coincides with what Mohammed said. We're seeing less notices than the spike that we saw before PA23 came in. And I think part of the reason for that is that, you know, we've got people that are worried about what they need to do and when they need to do it. We have, however, seen a noticeable rise in the future opportunity notices, so the UK2 or the pre-market engagements. So we are starting to see an increase in that, which is good, and that's a good sign. In general terms, though, the market is slow to adapt and react. Now, some people have suggested that it's all about non-compliance, but I don't think it's about non-compliance at all. I think it's just about a couple of things, really. One, I think we've got a little bit of a delay in reacting or publishing notice because people don't fully understand what it is they have to do, and they haven't got the resources to do it or experience of the new requirements. But I think it's also because there are still some loopholes in there at the moment in terms of what you can do, because you can still use some of the old sort of frameworks for buying. And I think that's something that maybe, Crown Commercial Services, perhaps they didn't think that one through. We are starting to see interest in the competitive flexible procedure, but not as much as we had expected. I think as a supplier, we expected to see more of that, and there's less at the moment. But again, I think because of the reasons that we've discussed. What we are seeing, though, is people looking at how they can actually start to engage more with SMEs and VCSEs and local firms, and looking at how they can keep procurement local. We've definitely started to see a lot of asks around that. I don't know whether we're noticing that more because we are very much a UK company serving the UK public sector. So maybe we're seeing more of that because of the range of customers that we have within the UK, because we've got thousands of customers. But that's, from my point of view, that's a good thing. And for somebody that works for a further education college group, I think that's also important, because I want to see the way that we're reacting with our local community and driving sort of like economic development within our own local community. So from my point of view, I think that's really important. The other thing that I have a huge sort of interest in is around social value, and we're certainly seeing a lot more of that. Most of us grimace when we talk about social value from a supplier point of view, because social value is really difficult in terms of actually showing the value within a particular geographic area, within the borough, within the sort of like the organisation territory, when often as a national company with a specific headquarter, it's difficult to always do all of those things on a more localised basis. But tell you what, though, it's making us think more about it and get smarter at how we actually do that, which is a really good thing, and that can only be of value. So I'm really pleased to see how that's developing. And of course, we are seeing, a range of new approaches coming to the market at the moment, which is good. Well, as I say, not enough of that flexible procedure right now. Framework's definitely on the up. Next slide, please, Mohammed.
Ian, just before we go into the next slide, really good assessment of what you've seen so far. One more interesting data is from the 8,500 tender notices which have been published, almost a majority, 80%, have actually used the open procedure, the single stage procedure. So in terms of the new competitive flexible procedure, just less than 5% of the total number of notices have actually used a competitive flexible procedure, which is really interesting, but something which will probably develop over the next several months.
I think so. Yeah, I think so, Mohammed. And to be honest, I think that people are just getting their heads around it at the moment. And I know there's been a number of meetings and sessions recently with procurement officers getting together and having some of those conversations. I'm sure that, what that potentially provides is a lot of flexibility. And sometimes flexibility is, causes confusion in itself. But I think there is some really good stuff. I think we'll see that increasing significantly, but I think it's going to be a few months away, before we really see those growing. Thank you, Mohammed. Next one. Implementation challenges. So this sort of ties in a little bit to what I was talking about earlier in terms of it's about the confidence to do something different. We have to make some changes. We have to start doing things different. But when something is as new as the Procurement Act 23, and when, as Mohammed, it's funny that it is 23 and we're in 2025, isn't it? We've already sort of like moved on from when we expected this to arrive to when it has arrived, and now we are struggling with the implementation because of everything else that's going on. But sometimes it is just about having the confidence, and I think the more that we actually enable collaboration between procurement officers and procurement teams and organisations, it will give us the confidence, and there will be some leaders and some people that have maybe got more resources that can start to do things, and then the rest will follow. It's that domino effect. I'm sure we will get there eventually, but it is a big challenge. When we think about it as well, there are many small procurement teams around. They're often very small. They're usually under-resourced, to be honest. So all this additional transparency and auditability that we're looking for, combined with the sheer number of notices, is a massive increase in admin and reporting. And what we really need to be doing is getting all of the buyers in an organisation to be involved and taking some of the pressure away from the procurement teams. And I'll come back to that in a few slides' time. And again, we've talked about the competitive flexible procedure. It isn't fully understood yet, I don't think. And I think one of the challenges is that there are not really any rules dictating when it should be used. And I think that's causing some reticence at the moment. But again, I'm sure we'll get past that. I think one of the other things that that people have mentioned to me about in terms of the reticence is I think that within some procurement communities, there's a little bit of a challenge around the negotiation skills that may be required going forward, which perhaps are a little bit more so than have been required in the past. And I think that's on, sort of like, everybody to make sure that we actually, encourage more skills. As an accountant, I'm not a procurement professional. I'm an accountant who needs to be involved in procurement and has needed to be so in the day jobs that I've had in the public sector in the past. And accountants are not necessarily automatic, and in the same way that procurement officers probably aren't at the start, are not automatically key negotiators. So it's something that we need to make sure we build in to our training, and we build up that capability so that we're not letting the suppliers get their own way. And I say that working for a supplier, it's important. That's a two-way process. So I think at the moment, in general, there's a feeling that, we're in that initial period since go live. It's a time for experimenting, reaching out, collaborating, and starting to build confidence. And my prediction is that next year will be very, very different. I think we will have a grasp of this next year, and we're going to start to see some changes. I think in summary for me, I don't think the Procurement Act has fully sunk in with many leadership teams. What we're seeing is that many medium and small sized procurement teams are struggling with the justification to properly digitise the way they do things. With larger ones, the large volume of procurement activities and contracts, they're now beginning to realise the sheer amount of work that their business stakeholders could be in for because of the new regulations, because of the new notices, and the work that's required around performance and KPIs, as well as payment notices. And with regard to the burden around KPIs and payments, that's not going to come in really until March, April next year. So I think, again, we've got a little bit of a people putting out fires first. They've got other focus, other priorities at the moment. So there's a bit of, we'll look at it later. We'll not worry about it now. We've got other things to prioritise. We'll look at that later. And I think that's partially aided by the fact that a lot of the frameworks that were there, that were updated pre-PA23, are still available to use. So I think a lot of people are using those frameworks to avoid actually having to go through the compliance associated with the Procurement Act. It's a big loophole, a very big loophole, to be honest. And that's only going to change as the frameworks are renewed. So I think the inevitability of it is, if you wait too long and don't start implementing at least some small change management exercises across your business, once March, April comes in next year, my prediction is that some of those business stakeholders are going to start pushing back on procurement when you ask them to do things differently. And that's not a good thing, because guess where that work's going to end up? It's going to end up in procurement, on procurement's plate. And procurement is already stretched. So it's more important that we try and look at what can we do about bite-sized change now to prevent some of those, sort of like horror stories appearing later. Just got a couple of slides. I just wanted to give you a bit of an indication in terms of a couple of our customers and where they are. Next slide, please, Mohammed. So one of our customers is the Met Office, and they had some challenges, I think, with like most people do, in terms of managing contracts and the transparency, lots of manual assurance checks, spreadsheets being, procurement and accountants. I'm the world's worst, as a bean counter. I use spreadsheets for absolutely everything. sometimes it's the right thing to do, but a lot of the time it isn't. And I think when we're looking at how we manage contracts and suppliers, we shouldn't be doing it on a spreadsheet, and we shouldn't be relying on sort of like on manual business processes. It's just, yeah, we can be so much more efficient. And I think the Met Office had some struggle, was struggling with the visibility of contracts, how they were being managed across different teams. Since they took on some of the software that we have, then they've enabled some really good results around that automated compliance and reporting, again, which you really need that sort of capability for the new Procurement Act. Having that centralized contract data and live performance insight, again, is really important. Next one, please, Mohammed. Another one of our customers is Thames Valley Housing. And as you can see, Thames Valley Housing were thinking ahead as to how they were actually going to cope with some of the transparency notice requirements for the new regulations, and hopefully we are having them as a satisfied customer. It's obviously what we all aim for. Next slide, Mohammed. Okay, so just in terms of Crown Commercial Services, so I mean, as again, I think Mohammed mentioned it at the start, PA23 replaced previous legislation, which was obviously designed to achieve transparency. But obviously now there's a lot more focus on contract and supplier management. There's more transparency, more compliance, more traceability, more auditability that we need to prove. And as Mohammed said, it's not just in the way we procure, but it's also how suppliers are performing across the whole term of the contract. Because quite rightly, if a supplier is not performing, to the stated or to the requirements of the contract, then we need to be able to do something about that. And I think that's really important. As you know, we're also having to publish a lot more notices each time an activity is undertaken. And for me, the question is, how do we empower the wider business community to be able to cope with all of those additional business processes that are required? For us at One Advance, that's about how we empower users. And again, going back to that first slide that I presented, empowering your world of work, because we're trying to make life simple for you. We're trying to make life simple for your users. So from a Procurement Act point of view, we thought about how we could do that. And what we decided to do was to work closely with Crown Commercial Services. So we partnered with Crown Commercial Services. We provided them with some technology advice. So from a technology point of view, they provided us obviously with guidance on the upcoming changes. And obviously we've still got, there are 17 notices. We've still got some to come, so they're not all live yet. So we're continuing on that engagement process. But what we did with our technology is we basically took the new regulations and we hard-coded them. So we hard-coded them into our systems so that the required notices are created automatically. So it's not a manual process to do that, even for a business user. So when a business user completes an activity, the system knows what notice needs to be generated. The system creates that notice. It notifies the users that it's done that. It notifies procurement teams, and it enables that notice to be published. And what that gives you then is a higher level of compliance and obviously a more collaborative procurement process. What it's also doing is it's enabling you to actually push out some of the procurement activities to business users with knowing full well that they will be compliant in the activities that they carry out, because the system effectively is enforcing it and ensuring compliance. Next slide, please, Mohammed. Excuse me if I'm coughing. I've had man flu for the last week. It's a terrible thing. Okay, so what this diagram does is it just sort of gives you a bit of an indication of how software solutions can actually help you with spend management. This gives an indication of our overall spend management solution. So we have what we call finance, spend and governance. And with finance, spend and governance, we've got spend management. I should say that we also provide spend management solutions completely separate to our finance solutions, if that's the requirement. So an example is University of Exeter, for example, use our purchasing over another finance solution. So we do lots of lots of different sort of options depending on where you are, which is quite useful when you're having to make the changes that people are having to make at the moment. So this diagram is a general spend management overview. We use that to support what we call our Office of the CFO, which is about improved transparency, traceability, auditability. I make no sort of apologies for repeating those phrases, because that is what it's all about. It's how we do that. What we're trying to do is we're trying to help procurement and finance leaders get greater spend clarity and greater spend control, because every pound counts. Every pound that you spend is a pound of taxpayers' money in some way, shape or form. So it's really important that we can justify that. And it's really important that we also look at the quality of service that is in future being received for each pound that's spent. So what I'm going to do is I just want to quickly just start at the bottom of this slide in terms of purchasing, because I think this is an often overlooked area. What we try to provide with purchasing, it is an online marketplace with pre-approved suppliers. What we're providing is an Amazon-like experience, but an Amazon-like experience for all business users. So it's not just procurement. It's especially useful for high volume, low value goods and services that you're buying from approved suppliers through catalogues. This is about enabling self-service and about removing some of the pressure from overloaded procurement teams. So that's a really important part for me, is just that standard procurement, the standard purchasing and how we do that. If I flip to the top of that slide and look more from a sourcing management point of view, then this is where we're talking about the higher value procurement needs. And this is what enables responsible procurement, adhering to Crown Commercial Services, adhering to the Procurement Act, but also adhering to your own procurement policies, regulations, and again, providing that transparency, traceability, auditability. Worthy of note is that we do still see many areas of the public sector struggling to actually cope with the automation of some of these processes. And actually the system can really help you with that. The other part of our spend solution is around supplier and contract management. So having a single contract register and being able to actually manage a centralized supplier register, centralized supplier records, so that you can do things like, maintaining and attaching insurance and certifications. But more importantly, from a contract management point of view, how do you actually manage those contracts? How do you make sure that you're actually getting best value from them out of the various contracts that you've got? So for us, that is a really important part of it. Next slide, please, Mohammed. Can I just check, Mohammed, have we got any questions or anything that have come through while I've been waffling?
Not at the moment.
That's okay. That's fine. And if you do have any questions, then please do populate them in the Q&A, and we'll pick them up at the end, if not while we're going. Just a couple of slides. I'm not going to labour these slides. You'll see in line with the Procurement Act, you'll see how this is sort of like following a workflow in terms of what needs to be done when going through from preliminary market engagement through to termination and the different notices that are required. We've got a couple of different approaches. And so for customers that have just got our supplier and contract management solution, we enable them to work with that alongside their existing tendering solutions, so they can get the benefits of what we do with supplier and contract management, but without necessarily having to change existing source to contract arrangements. Where there is an opportunity to do things wider than that, then of course we do have source to contract. Next slide, please, Mohammed, which I'm hoping says source to contract on it. Yeah. Okay, so this is just giving you a little bit of an indication over where, if you look at the bottom of this slide, the way that our sourcing modules, supplier and contract management and master agreement modules work to enable all of those notices. Obviously, we've not got all of them finished at the moment because we've not had full specification for all of the notices yet, but we are working on them as and when, and particularly with Crown Commercial Services as they come through to us. We'll be providing all of these slides as well, so if there's anything that you want to check up on afterwards, please do feel free to reach out. And we are providing lots of demonstrations and things of this software capability at the moment. If you just go to the next one, Mohammed. So just in terms of source to contract from One Advanced, Then what we're enabling really is continuity from tender notices. So if you've got an existing solution, you can use our solution to run alongside your existing platform. That enables you to create the contracts from previously published notice, and it continues the notice generation through the timeline from UK 7 onwards. The most important thing about this is we're trying to find a way of making sure we reduce change management overheads. Change management is always the hardest thing to deal with, and I think that is one of the barriers that we're seeing to change at the moment with regards to the Procurement Act. So we're working hard to try and do that. The next slide, please, Mohammed, which is around the actual notice workflows. So again, what we've built into the system is workflow capability. So based on the attributes of the contract record, the required notices are automatically generated by the system. So this isn't down to an individual business user having to remember to do something. It's going to make sure that those notices are created automatically. It's going to identify what the optional notices are, if there are any. And it's also going to provide insight into what you might expect going forward. And again, when you think about what we're trying to do at the moment across procurement, having that capability within the system and being able to drive that compliance is obviously really important around those notices. Next slide, please. In terms of notice management, then obviously, there's information that's required to be compliant. You've got to publish those notices as part of the record life cycle. And what we're making sure is that users have got the ability to view those due dates for notices, as well as what information is required. So it's going to reduce the need to update notices. It's going to ensure users are aware of their obligations. And it's also going to enable you to report on outstanding notices. Next slide. It's also obviously about compliance reporting. One of the big things that our users have come back to us and said is that they're really worried about how they ensure not only that they're compliant, but how they actually monitor that in terms of the actual reporting side of it. So they can see areas where notices haven't been sent within the due time frame, as well as being prepared for any upcoming breaches. So they get the ability to look at where they are exactly, assess the processes that they've carried out, and it gives some assurance. I think also, it also makes sure that we've actually got somebody that is responsible for actually doing things, and it just makes it, again, it's just trying to find ways of automating so that we can make things more manageable for the procurement community. So next slide, please. This is just looking at what we think procurement professionals should be prioritising next. It certainly should be around shifting focus from initial compliance to looking at things in a more strategic and a more business as usual way. We're not there yet, absolutely not. But that's what we need to be doing next. We need to be thinking about how we get there. We like to think that our systems will help with that, but there's still plenty of work to be done. So the key priorities that we think, one is understanding those transitional arrangements. We've got to look at the framework agreements that were established under the public contracts regulations. Some of those are still valid. We've got to look at what the path is and when some of those are changing. We've got the latest iteration of G-Cloud almost on the doorstep. Don't know about you guys, but that's giving me wobbles at the moment, because we've got a lot of work to do, to try and make sure that our solutions are positioned correctly for the latest iteration of G-Cloud. And then we've got the whole consideration about dynamic purchasing systems, which are going to close by 2029. Dynamic markets, well, we shall see. We shall see. We're waiting to see what happens next. But that is where we need to have our focus. It's an opportunity to review and update procurement procedures anyway. Obviously, whenever there's a change in guidelines, guidance, legislation, it's an opportunity to do that. I think it's also an opportunity to look at how we actually use modern capability around workflow to actually automate those processes. So now is the time to be looking and thinking about the future, particularly before we get to next year, about how you're actually going to be able to manage those effectively. And obviously, we've got to pay attention to new notice types. We are seeing a lot of these PMEs, preliminary market engagement notices, coming through, but it is still an area where, I think some people are a little bit reticent and not sure what to do with them and when to do them. We definitely have to upskill teams, and we definitely and that's not just procurement teams, it's stakeholders within the business as well. We need to make sure if you're a you know, sort of like a financial or a management accountant within an organization, you need to understand how these things work as well. If you're in a line of business, you need to understand how you can efficiently, you know, continue procurement whilst being compliant. And in order to do that, we're going to have some focus. This is going to be you know, it's going to get a lot of attention from audit, internal and external audit going forward as well as the external view coming from the government. We have to embrace transparency and performance monitoring, obviously. PA23 does place greater emphasis on that. We all want to do that anyway, so this is giving us an excuse to actually make some changes and do it. We do need to think about KPIs. The key performance indicators are really, really important. We've got to make sure that contracts include provisions as well for electronic invoices and prompt payment. You know, that shouldn't be an issue in 2025. It is, and we need to make sure we address that. The central digital platform, I think, as both Mohammed and myself said before, you know, there are still updates that are going to come out of that. So we just need to make sure we familiarise ourselves with that, and that we understand, you know, what those platforms are doing and what's coming out of them and how to manage supplier data. And then obviously, as I mentioned, we've got to audit existing contracts and pipelines to check for compliance. So that in itself is a job that, you know, that we can't put off till tomorrow. We have to start doing it sooner rather than later. So I think those are the sort of like the main areas that we see as priorities. But again, we would be really interested to hear from you if you've got some alternate views to that. Just one or two slides left for me, Mohammed, if you can go to
Ian, before we move any further, some very important kind of priorities you've listed here. Upskilling teams and stakeholders. I think, as we've probably all gathered, the Procurement Act is not just for the procurement team, it's a transformation journey for the entire organization. So everybody in the organization needs to have at least some basic awareness of what the obligations are under the Procurement Act. We've got quite a few colleagues from the audit kind of background on this call today, on this webinar today. Ian, I think the Procurement Act, the Central Digital Platform, and your system as well, gives a huge amount of data at their disposal to actually undertake the audits. Any kind of comments on that you'd like to maybe mention?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And, you know, when I first started working in the public sector, particularly for our external auditors, we used to try and put them in the basement of the town hall, well away from everybody, so to make life difficult for them. I'm glad to say that world's moved on now to the way that we work now. But it's really important. You know, there is a lot of information. You know, we are very data rich. You know, to a large extent, we're often data rich and information poor. And from an auditor, whether you're internal or, you know, you're focused on, you know, sort of like internal controls or external audit, it's really important that you can have access to the information. And the good thing with modern systems is that we can give auditors access to that data and to that information. So they don't actually need to start downloading stuff into alternate systems or, heaven forbid, into spreadsheets to start looking at and analysing data. We can do that within the systems. And because these new systems have full auditability, so you've got full audit control, you can see right the way through, everything is time and date stamped. So you know when it's been done, you know who did it, and you know, and you've got you know who is responsible. That should make auditing more focused on the exceptions, and it should enable us as audit professionals to actually look at how we can improve services going forward and make suggestions to improve things, rather than always having to look backwards. I think the challenge for me when I did my audit training was I always felt as though all of my job was looking backwards at what's happened in the past, when in actual fact we need also to be able to look forward. So I think we've got more of that capability now because of the data, because of the insight, and I should say as well, because of artificial intelligence. You know, all of these new systems have got AI running underneath them. I always say to people, you can't always trust AI because it hallucinates. But actually, if the AI is based on the data within your system and you've got sovereign responsibility and capability of that system, then it's not going to be hallucinating, it's going to be correct. So we've got some really good capability there that's coming through all these systems.
Yeah, and Ian, the other issue is if internal auditors don't check this, we've got to have rival suppliers check in the activities of a particular authority, especially when they're nosing into a rival supplier's behavior and performance. So there's a
Absolutely,
lot of data, and there's going to be a lot of data mining taking place in the next couple of
there is.
years, which everybody just needs to be aware of.
They
The
do.
other interesting point, Ian, which you might want to mention some points on, is some of the new notices which are still to come out, the contract payment notice and the payment compliance notice, requires somebody in the finance team, a director of finance, or somebody
Yeah.
senior, to actually sign it off. And this
Yes.
is something that the finance team really need to get to grips with before they
Yeah.
actually have to start publishing these notices.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right, Mohammed. And to be honest, that's why from our point of view, we've linked all of this into what we call the office of the CFO, because this is about the CFO or Section 151 in a local authority or Section 73, depending on where you are. It's all about making sure that we've got a fully collaborative and integrated solution, because procurement and spend is absolutely part of finance. And you're absolutely right. Some of those more senior officers all of a sudden are going to have to start taking some more responsibility because they've got to sign things off. So it's even more important now than it ever has been that actually you're able to work that integration story within, for everybody's benefit. Okay, just if you switch to the next one, Mohammed, we do have a procurement hub is available for everyone to access. So everybody's going to get copies of these slides, so you'll be able to access this. But within our procurement hub, we've got lots of information on not just the requirements of the Act, but also, potentially how solutions can support that. Shouldn't say this on a SIPFA webinar, should I? But we've also done some work with Socratim. So obviously, sort of like where CFOs and CIOs collide is often in terms of having making sure they've got the right solutions to support, everybody within the organisation. So we've been doing some work across not just SITFA, but also Socratim as well on that. And some of the briefings there are quite useful. And you might find, if you're a procurement leader, you might find that some of that information is useful to actually help engage others within the senior management team within your organisation. So that data is all available there. And the final thing from me, I suppose, last slide is just do connect with us. We are very keen, always keen to come out. I mean, since the drudgery of COVID and being stuck at home all the time, we all like to actually get out and do face-to-face meetings. But more importantly, we can talk until we're blue in the face about the fact that we've got wonderful systems. I don't expect you to believe that until you've actually seen it. So if you want to see any of the stuff that I've talked about today, we are more than happy to come out and talk to you about the issues that the Act presents and how we can hopefully help you to solve for some of those challenges.
That's the end of the. Thank you, Ian. That's the end of the formal presentation. But we've still got a few minutes left for questions and answers. So if you can use the Q&A functionality on your system, please send us your questions, and we're more than happy to respond to your questions. So, any questions from colleagues listening on this webinar? Ian, I think when the conduct performance notice, the one which will actually deal with poor performance, or the KPI notice, when that is activated, it's expected to be activated from the 1st of November. It's not been fully confirmed, but when it does, that's going to really create some really interesting kind of actions and activities where we get more data coming out in terms of real performance of public sector contracts. And if the contracts haven't been delivered in terms of what's been promised, we can expect to see possible court action, more kind of press headlines, etc.
Yeah, I think for certain, particularly at the moment, we live in a very politic-driven world, don't we? Particularly with some of the more recent changes within the political scene. I think once this information is made publicly available, it's going to be hot information. It's going to be picked up by press outlets. It's going to be picked up by political groups, and so it is going to be a hot potato. And also, as you mentioned before, Mohammed, the information is going to be out there, and it is going to be looked at and dissected by other suppliers to the marketplace as well. So, I'm quite sure that at One Advanced, we're going to be looking to see if anybody is failing to deliver on their contracts, and if there's an opportunity for us to disrupt to the marketplace, then we'll be looking to do so. Every supplier will be doing the same. The challenge we're going to have as procurement professionals is how we manage that, because all of a sudden, once all of this information is public knowledge, we're then going to start to get a lot of requests for, for more information. I think we're probably going to see more freedom of information requests start to land, but we're also going to see a lot more questions requiring us to justify certain decisions that have been made in the past, which, up till now, we've not had to do. I think we're going to see a lot more of that going forward, which is what the government wanted. They were looking for transparency and responsibility and, traceability and all that. But that's going to be quite hard on procurement teams. So we do need to be ready for it. And as I say, if we can automate anything to give us some more time to do that, a big part of my remit is trying to make sure that we sort of automate the simple stuff. So as an accountant, I expect we should be able to automate a lot of financial accounting so that we can concentrate on management accounting. And that's the same from a procurement point of view. How can we automate and make simple the more routine tasks so that we can be more strategic and actually create some time to deal with some of this more, some of the questions that are going to come from being more open.
Ian, one question.
Big challenge.
One question that we've had, Ian, is in terms of the very low use of dynamic markets. Any comments on that in terms of, do you think that's going to improve itself, or does it probably require some substantive legislative changes before authorities make use of dynamic markets? At the moment, only two local authorities have actually tried to attempt to set up a dynamic market.
Yeah, I think it will come. I think it's just early days yet, and I think it's just resource availability and lack of understanding of what can be done. And I think actually, we do need some organisations to show the way and to be the leaders, and to show what can be done. And then I think others will follow. It is just a question of time. I think it's early days. It's early days yet. We've got a long way to go, and I think we just need to enable people to make that change. And then once they're enabled to do so, and we can free some resources up, then we'll start to see some more creative procurement, and we'll certainly see some more of that, the dynamism that's needed for those marketplaces.
And in respect of your information hub, it has some details of all the notices which authorities have to publish, which is freely available to everybody as well.
It does, yeah, it does. We've just tried to pull everything together in a single repository, so it should be quite useful.
So we're coming to the very end of the session. Ian, just one kind of final kind of point to authorities in terms of Procurement Act and what they should be doing from now
on. I think the big thing for me is just that if you've not started to make the changes that you need to make, you need to start making them now. Don't put off till tomorrow what needs to be done today. I think it's as simple as that. It is complicated. There is a lot to do, but start doing it now. Don't wait any longer. We need to start moving now.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, colleagues, for joining us today. And as we kind of round up, in terms of your compliance, if you're in the flat compliance box there, you've got to move away from that kind of box. And Procurement Act needs a transformative compliance or more strategic compliance, especially when you mentioned about the LGR. That's going to have a fundamental change of how many authorities we have, how procurement is actually carried out. So we're going to see lots of changes over the next couple of years. Try to avoid the minimum compliance. You could probably get away with it under the PCR regime. Procurement Act is very different. Everything that you do, as we highlighted in the session, is out in the public domain. So you've got to try to be as compliant as you possibly can. So try to be a transformative or strategic compliance to be able to meet the obligations under the Act. So finally, if you have any further questions, please do contact Ian or myself. Thank you for joining us at today's lunchtime webinar, and look forward to seeing you at future events. Have an enjoyable rest of today. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.